if you don't create an inclusive culture first, that's not going to work. And actually, it's quite dangerous and irresponsible to just throw the ball at people who are the diverse or out-group employees and to assume that that's going to fix your inclusion or diversity problems. You have to create inclusive environments. And if you do that, people will organically and individually feel safe enough.
Welcome to the Work Intelligence Lab podcast. This is where data sparks the conversation and real-world insight takes us further. In this episode, we are looking at a curious shift of the world in work. The idea of authenticity is everywhere, and it's one of the most talked about topics in leadership and workplace culture. In fact, it shows up in academic research over 1 million times, almost twice as often as happiness, stress, or even COVID-19, and 50 times more than career success. But what does that mean? What does that mean to be authentic at work? Is it a good thing? Has it worked for you? I'm not sure it's worked for me, but we'll find out. Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, his book is Don't Be Yourself, challenges some of our most popular assumptions about authenticity, confidence, and career success. And I'm going to hand over you to Dr. Tomas. You're an author, you're an entrepreneur, you're a psychologist. And one of the things I want to know is, what is the most interesting question you have been asked about your career?
Oh, that's a really good, as everybody can hear, I wasn't ready for this one. It's a good starter. No ice breaking. I mean, other than this one, of course, but that would be cheating. I would say, the first thing that comes to mind is not the most interesting, but the most boring, which is, how do you have time to do all these things?
Well, it's
Or do
true.
you ever sleep? Yeah, no, but I would say maybe, what would you have done if you hadn't done what you did? I like that one, thinking of sort of like sliding doors moment as applied to career and parallel universe. And if you want, I don't know if you care about the answer, Karla.
I want the answer. Let's go for it.
Yeah, I always tell people psychology was like my fifth or sixth option. I first, I'm very cliched as an Argentine guy. I first tried to be a football player or soccer player for our American friends. That didn't work out. Then I tried to become a tango dancer. That didn't work out. As it turns out, you need talent for both of those things. I had none. And then I actually briefly managed to try my luck as a soap opera actor when I was 17. Again, very cheesy and unintellectual, but that didn't work out either. So, by default, I didn't know what to study. Everybody sort of in the area where I live had done psychology, so I went into that, and one thing led to the next after that.
So you decided to study everybody else because you failed.
Yeah,
Not,
exactly.
Not fair. Failure is the springboard to success, as I would.
That's a much more elegant and interesting way to sum it up and answer that question.
Okay, so we are in the world where we are overwhelmed with data, and one of the things that we look at is, the Work Intelligence Lab has got access to over 100 billion points of it, right? And one of the things I looked at thinking about the book and reading your book is that our talent barometer shows that 76% of workers feel confident in their skills and career prospects. Now, on the flip of that, your book suggests that while feeling authentic can boost confidence, being authentic at work actually might hold us back. So my question to you is, where do you see the link here, and what does that mean in terms of how we show up?
Yeah, so I think, that data you cited, mentioned, are very compelling, clearly. And, I guess the way to kind of reconcile or find a compromise between what seems to be a contradiction is something that I suggest to all of our listeners and everybody in general to do more often, which is to look for the nuances and for the, beautiful strengths and advantages of moderation. Something we don't do very often, right? So you mentioned confidence. It's of course fantastic that more often than not, people, especially young people starting their careers, feel confident about their prospects. And by the way, contrary to what the self-help industry might suggest, as you well quoted with this data, people are generally not pathologically insecure or needing a big ego boost. Which would be bad, right? Being paralyzed by self-doubt and insecurity is awful. I mean, nobody wants to be in that position. But what's important to understand is that even good things stop being good when you take them to their extreme. And so, I'm sure you can see how being so confident in your career prospects that you don't see the potential disruptions that AI is bringing, that you don't see the uncertainty, the difficulties of actually even getting an internship, that you might overestimate your chances of charming others in an interview just by being yourself, because you've been drinking from the Kool-Aid too much or listening to all these ego massaging or ego boosting advice that says, oh, just be you no matter what and everything will be fine. I think these are dangerous displays and indicators of overconfidence, of our narcissistic culture and zeitgeist in general. And I think somewhat of a reality check and a dose of humility could probably do a lot of good to people. That's really what I try to do. But in the end, what I'm saying is that, of course, with authenticity, you shouldn't be a fraud, a phony, or live in alienation or oppression. But you should also not assume that you can just be you and everybody will celebrate that. I mean, maybe you are special, but for the vast majority of people, it takes a lot of work and effort to be appreciated by others.
I'm one who who has highs and lows. So I sometimes feel confident, sometimes imposter syndrome, anxious, or all these sorts of things. And it brings me, it leads me to when I was reading the book and I was thinking to myself, oh, what is happening in the world at the moment is we are having to do these personality tests for interviews, right? And as part of that, I had to do one for my role in a more sort of senior leadership role, and most people will as they enter into the workforce, even in the beginning of their careers. Now that's sort of happening, and my instinct is be my authentic self, answer the way I would, right? That's what they're looking for, and my wife insisted that I buy the Hogan test and prep tests and make sure that my answer aligned with what the company wanted to see. And I thought that just defeats the entire purpose. So I suppose my question to you is bringing your authentic self to work the biggest line business, or is it a way to make us feel free while quietly training us to conform? What are your thoughts there?
Well, you're raising a really interesting point, and if I had to pick between your approach or your wife's, I will take hers. I think I mean, if you have to do that, but of course, what's even more interesting, Karla, is that even when in your mind you're kind of answering a personality assessment or psychological test in the way that seems most genuine and natural to you, and let's say you're being spontaneous, which, by the way, most test developers would encourage you to do, you're actually still inadvertently in your professional self mode. You're still thinking, okay, why else would you answer questions such as I enjoy working with others, and I feel a buzz when projects are going well, or I get annoyed when people don't meet deadlines. I mean, the honest or truthful answer to any of these questions would be, well, it depends. So you couldn't answer any, right? I mean, that would be the only real one. And what do you notice? That sometimes you feel confident, sometimes you feel imposter syndrome. That's called normality, by the way. Only lunatics are permanently under a state of, overconfident euphoria, which we call delusion. And obviously, there are people who, unfortunately, are riddled with anxiety on a pathological level, and who would benefit from therapy and treatment that, tend to experience unrealistically high chronic levels of anxiety. By the way, it's no more than 5 or 10% of the population. But yeah, I think, you could apply the same reasoning to when you go to an interview. It's now, and even to CVs, right? You may have seen now, it's quite fashionable to promote on LinkedIn and other channels this idea that we should all have a failure resume that lists all of our failures. But, you shouldn't really list your failures. You should list only the failures that can be interpreted as, wow, you're really a brave, amazing, courageous person. Likewise, the old dreaded question of like, tell me about your biggest weaknesses is not truly an invitation to tell everybody. It's for you to make up some pseudo weaknesses that can be disguised as virtues, right? So, you wouldn't normally tell people, for example, that you're a sexist or a racist or a classist, or that you hate working with people, or that you really hated the last 6-7 bosses that you had. But you might say you're a compulsive perfectionist and, sometimes that delays your projects, but you're working on it. And luckily, you're so humble that you can take on feedback from others.
It's interesting, some of those answers that you're giving, because what you essentially saying is we're encouraging from a societal view to be authentic, to be just yourself in whatever setting it is. But in reality, we're not the same with friends as we are in a relationship. We're not the same at work as we are in I don't know, when we go out socializing and all these, or sports, as we are maybe in a calm environment when we go to yoga. So that doesn't, we wouldn't be the same person in yoga as we would in a football team, right? So I suppose my question is, if organizations are promoting this idea of authenticity, what mindset that individuals and organizations, what do they need to adopt so that they are set up for success in the future of work?
Yeah, a great, set of interconnected questions. First, I think it's really important to understand how we got to this sort of like authenticity cult,
True.
as I call it, in the first place. And I think actually, like many trends that have gone overboard and become diluted or diminished by sort of like, the simplification or oversimplification of the mass discussion of them, mostly in like self-help kind of books, etc. They actually start from a good place and with good intentions. If you only go back in time, I know you care a lot about the future of work, but to understand where we might be going, it's interesting to see where we've come from. And you only go back in time 100 years or so, the average experience that workers would have, even in the developed world, was very close to a kind of Marxist form of alienation. The typical assembly line worker would clock in and out, couldn't wait until it was 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. And then, if they're in the UK, have a beer as soon as they're out. In other places, get home and, watch television or have a meal cooked, etc. I mean, when they would be asked by their wife or husband, hey, how was your day at the office? It would be unthinkable for them to say something like, oh, it was all right, but I didn't experience a high sense of purpose or a sense of calling. That didn't exist. These are modern, very recent inventions.
Sure.
And that speaks to how work actually, it's actually a facet of progress. We have made work better because today the average employee, at least in the developed, but largely in the developing world, if you're looking at the knowledge economy at least, has consumer-like experiences, has high expectations, expects to be engaged. And engagement is really interesting because there's a guy called William Kahn who in 1990 invented the term, he coined the term engagement. It was, probably just a new version of job satisfaction, but it got a lot of impact. And of course, every organization now evaluates employee engagement or sentiment and morale, which is very important and predicts performance. But William Kahn defined it in a really interesting way. He said, engagement is the psychological distance and in fact proximity between your work self and your self-concept. In other words, the more you see your work persona or your professional self as a genuine, valid, and core element of your identity, the happier you will be and the more enthusiastic you will be engaged. So in other words, engagement is like the opposite of alienation, which is great and all sounds great. Now, the problem is that, of course, if this then is distorted as you have to bring every single aspect of your personal self to work, that doesn't work that way. In fact, even that was well intended because, as you will know, a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging interventions encourage those individuals who have traditionally been part of the out group because of their race, class, age, sexual orientation, whatever, right? There are all these categories. We can't start to name one without saying
and you can
neurodiverse.
carry on and on and on with the.
But it was a really good idea to tell, hey, just because you don't match the cultural norm and you're a bit of a cultural misfit, just because you're part of the out group and you're not a traditional employee, we don't want you to feel alienated. So please come and feel free to share who you are with everybody. It's a nice idea. But now we get to the answer of the last part of your question. If you don't create an inclusive culture first, that's not going to work. And actually, it's quite dangerous and irresponsible to just throw the ball at people who are the diverse or out-group employees and to assume that that's going to fix your inclusion or diversity problems. You have to create inclusive environments. And if you do that, people will organically and individually feel, free, safe enough to share certain things. By the way, one final point is that every person is different, including in the degree to which we want to keep our personal and our professional selves connected or not. That's what research showed, after Kant's assumption on engagement. And most people, I would say, inhabit multiple selves. There is this beautiful concept called self-complexity, which talks about all the dimensions that make up your identity. So there is, potentially me, the soccer player, me, the manager, me, the father, me, the husband, and nobody's paid for unleashing all of these aspects of their self at work. If you find a few people who care about who you are more broadly and deeply, fine. It's great to have friends at work, but there are also professional boundaries, and we are paid for bringing our best self to work, being cordial and respectful to others, and actually accomplish what's in our job description.
Do you see that there's a need for organizations to shift their narrative to not to explain that, but to let people understand that what it is we're actually trying to design? Or is that just, do you think, something that's going to, authenticity is something that changed over time and it will be a natural organic movement? What are your thoughts?
I think this is a constant kind of I think the psychological contract, and the deal that employees expect, especially when they're fortunate enough to have a career and not just a job, needs to be negotiated all the time and needs to be kind of made as explicit as possible. But you should also read between the lines. Hopefully most people, even when they hear bring your whole self to work, don't turn up in their pajamas, or if they have fascist inclinations with their kind of fascist showing their fascist tattoos. Or, by the way, this is also important, right? Because you say bring your whole self to work sounds great, but what if you are a fascist, or you are a sexist, or you are a Nazi? Oh, well, then not. Okay, so which categories are allowed? The ones that actually fit in with the culture? Then we are not, encouraging any diversity at all. But I think it will be appropriate to strive for some balance and, help people understand that there are some minimal expectations about displaying a certain level of psychological maturity, which, by the way, involves fundamentally understanding where the right to be you ends and your obligation to others begins. Even, Karla, this idea that, you should always be true to your values, it sounds great, right? But the world is already so polarized and tribalized because we live in this egocentric, delusion that our values are better than others, and that, if we feel a certain way, others are right unless they agree with us. There's a really good book that I recommend that I just finished reading called Infantilized by a Danish anthropologist. And it starts with this true story of a young employee who's having her performance review, and the manager says, let's say, Karla, you're performing really well. We're very happy. You're meeting results. But, the one thing that is an opportunity for improvement is sometimes, especially when you communicate with clients, you should pay attention to how you spell things and your grammar, because, it may suggest that you're sloppy and not kind of proofreading that. And her answer, the employee answer, is, but that's how I spell it.
Right.
And then when she gets home, she complains to her parents, and then the mother calls the manager and say, how dare you correct my daughter about, and it sounds like it will be like some kind of comedy sketch in fiction, but actually, the perpetual kind of pushing and nudging of people to just be themselves and not worry about what others think of them, and kind of completely free themselves up from any obligation, accountability, or responsibility to adjust their behavior to a norm, is now more prevalent than, any suggestion to kind of bring your best self or make an effort to manage impressions. By the way, strategic impression management or strategic social desirability has always worked really well. And, sometimes, in fact, more often than not, that's what's rewarded in a company. It can also get too far, right? Because we've all seen the politicians that manage up and spend all the time sucking up to their bosses, and they get promoted over and above the people who work really hard, but are, not thinking about self-promotion or branding or whatever you want to call it. I'm against that. But if the solution is telling people that they should just be themselves and ignore what people think of them, then we're doing them a disservice.
You bring such a valid point, and it literally happened this morning. My son got in trouble at summer camp, and I said, what happened? He said, I might have been a little bit, whatever, but it was just me. I was just being myself. And I thought about today and us having this conversation, and I said to him, but you got to rein that back sometimes. And are we, is what we're doing as parents and bringing on this new generation, teaching them that they can just be themselves, they can act how they want and get their way.
And there are so many analogies and parallels between being a manager and being a parent. And I think, maybe you would expect, maybe there shouldn't be. I have young kids, not just my 8-year-old, but my 5-year-old also understands how not to bring their whole self or their personal self to other people's birthday party. That's why kids universally behave much better when they're not in their home.
This is very true. You've done a lot of research around leadership in the workspace, but what made you think about authenticity, and what is it that emphatically you feel passionate about that we need to change? And I'm particularly wanting to focus in on the audience around we speaking to HR leaders who are building culture, who have this, paradox that they are constantly juggling around all the things you've mentioned. So that was a loaded question. So, I can repeat it in increments.
No. No, but I think it goes back to what you mentioned at the beginning. We're all about data and evidence, right? And I think the most impactful opportunity to leverage data, particularly when you have data at scale, whether it's our organizational data, our clients' data, research data, etc., is when it highlights counterintuitive findings. And I kind of get obsessed with topics where the mainstream view has become so undata driven and so kind of detached from the evidence that actually even the commonsensical view is now heretic or controversial, right? So, in a normal world, it should not be controversial to tell people, hey, make an effort to not be a jerk and, to bring your best self to work and, just try to be kind and nice, which, by the way, people are independently saying. Also, now we're going to get to HR, right? HR leaders have understood for about 2 decades that emotional intelligence is one of the key predictors of leadership behavior, of leadership effectiveness, of managerial performance and effectiveness. And by the way, managers are responsible for 30 or 40% of the variability in team performance, leaders maybe 40, 50%. So we simultaneously ask organizations, and HR professionals are asking their CEOs and their boards to pay attention to EQ, emotional intelligence, which of course in the age of AI is even more important because we lost the IQ race to AI. But even if AI can imitate EQ, it will never give a damn. It can't care about what people are caring, and it can't have a humane understanding or human understanding of others.
There are
And
no
yet,
consequences.
no consequences either. Yeah, exactly. And it's just computer code. But in all this kind of context, we forget that even if you look at EQ, is the exact opposite of being your authentic self, right? The best examples of like high EQ people would be a poker player. You never know what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and they can strategically make you think that they're feeling one thing or the other. Of course, I'm not saying that we should turn the average employee or leader into a Machiavellian poker player, but people who understand how they impact others and who are capable of tuning into other people's emotions because they're not really self-centered do better. And you mentioned leadership. The worst thing we can ask leaders, this is probably, the end of the book talks about the implications for diversity and inclusion, career success, and leadership. But the leadership ones are really, really important because every HR department and HR professional understands that you need to develop leaders. Well, hopefully they understand you need to select the right ones to begin with. And the worst thing we can tell leaders is to just be themselves. Unfortunately, we celebrate very powerful individuals, think of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, because they display rebellious, contrarian, anti-establishment, and often antisocial features. And this, gives the impression to many young people that they can just be themselves, and it doesn't matter whatever they say, whatever atrocity they say, no matter how much they hurt others. Oh, it's fine because they're being themselves. No. Certain people are capable of being themselves and are given license because they are the status quo. They are the elite, and actually, if authenticity is a privilege for the few individuals who are at the top of society and organizations, and they don't feel accountable or responsible for modeling positive behavior, it's really a missed opportunity to actually improve their leadership. But, if you think about developing leaders, I always say the best leaders develop by learning how to go against their nature, which doesn't mean that they become impostors, but they learn to develop and cultivate habits that weren't in their natural strengths or natural personality to begin with. So imagine, you're an introverted person, but you're given the opportunity to be in a sales role. You shouldn't quit. You need to learn how to, put on or switch on sociability and extroversion, because that's now part of your professional remit. It will be exhausting and it will require a lot of emotional labor, but if you do that, you're going to be much better off. Equally, if you're an impulsive, moody, irritable person, it doesn't mean you can't lead or manage, but hopefully you will work on that impulsivity and, you will do meditation, yoga, or take your pills, your medication, so that other people don't need to suffer because you're just unleashing your grumpy impulsivity on them.
It was one of my favorite parts in the book, that chapter around, yes, we can all work on our strengths, but then where what do we become? We become another isolated version or
Yes.
of ourselves. I think you've got the better words for it, but for me, what I took away was exactly that, right? Yes, we've got our strengths and we can lead with them, but let's really focus on where the areas where we're challenged, and it's that get out of your comfort zones sort of story again.
And I'll give you a really nice analogy to understand this, because I think this is ultimately diversity at the individual level, is how you can enrich
Exactly.
your identity and your character, as opposed to, I am like that, so I only talk to these people, and if they agree with me, fine. If not, is something most people love doing, which is traveling, right? And when you travel to a certain place, even if you're not very observant and very tolerant or very kind of modest, you'll probably make an effort to adjust your behavior to what's going on around you, because you make an effort to fit into that culture, which, by the way, doesn't mean you're abandoning who you truly are. You will always be you. And as Jarvis Cocker said, you will see the quote in the book, you will always be you no matter where you go and what you do. You will always be stuck with yourself, right? So even telling people just be you, not, it's kind of besides point and irrelevant, because we are the sum of things we do. And I think the decision is more about how much effort and should we make and attention should we pay to ensure that our behaviors aren't obnoxious and don't alienate others, and are actually, welcomed by others, which again is not a sign of weakness, is a sign of emotional maturity.
Yeah. Out of this book, when you walk away, what is it that you are trying to achieve? What do you want to get across? What is your hope that will change?
With this one, I really hope that it cannot just, preach to the choir or to the converted, but actually engage people with data and evidence so that they question their assumptions about authenticity. Then, of course, our business is really focused, has always been focused on finding the right career and job for the right person, right? Is what we do. We have 50, 60 million people that touch all of our platforms and channels every year. And, we try to use data, AI, technology, but also human expertise to guide them to the most appropriate and fulfilling job. But that's only half of the equation. Then you need to educate people so that they actually make the most of that opportunity and, behave in ways that make them succeed in that job. So, if I have one kind of a secret hope with this book, is that it can improve people's prospects when they, candidates or job seekers prospects, when they land a job, when they're invited to an interview. So I have specific sections on how you answer an interview. I try to explain to people that an interview isn't an invitation to be honest, but it's an invitation to display social skills and, to show that you have the basic EQ or social intelligence to understand what the etiquette is and, make eye contact, call people by their name. Karla, it's very important, Karla, don't
Yes.
forget. If you do it too much,
Dr. Tomas.
if you do it too much, you see, it'll be an example of, oh my God, this guy or person read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People too often and is doing it on me. That's also important, right? You have to do it in a way that seems natural. And, and as for HR leaders, my hope is simply to make them understand that the kind of authenticity they should want is not, sort of self-reported or self-perceived authenticity, but authenticity in the eyes of others. So it's not how important you as an employee, as a manager, as a leader, how authentic you think you are, but it's how authentic other people think you are. And by the way, the people that are deemed authentic by others make a great deal of effort to inhibit their undesirable and counterproductive tendencies. Is they don't bring their whole self to work and they leave the bad parts of their self at home, which often makes me feel sorry for the people who are at home with those parts. But that's maybe a different podcast.
I was having a conversation with a colleague who was talking, working globally as a leader, and basically saying that they look at leadership in the reverse. How do I lead to that individual? How do I lead? Because that is more authentic. That is where you're developing that trust and authenticity. So they may be more fast paced. They may be whatever. Another individual may be needing a little bit more motivation. And so you are drawing out different parts of yourselves to lead them. You are and you were right in the very beginning. People ask you, what do you do with your time? What is this inspired in terms of your next area of research? What do you see coming down?
Oh, what a good question. I think, whenever you finish a book, it's usually even with generative AI and with Copilot, it's still a 2-year process, right? It's very helpful to use these tools, but it's very long. Look, I think fundamentally, I'm more about ensuring that we can apply um, the insights and the lessons from our data, from our research. The book is just an attempt to tell the story. But what I'm focused on most of my time, 80-90% of my times, is in really, scaling up these insights with tools, which is obviously what we do with you and our colleagues, so that our clients can really become more evidence-based and improve, if they're HR professionals, improve the caliber of leaders, improve the quality of the culture, improve, I think fundamentally, uh, the meritocracy and the fairness that organizations really want to have. I mean, that's really the one thing that brings it all together. If there is one big reason for paying attention to the data and the evidence, is because it helps us distinguish between perceptions and reality, between style and substance. So if you think about it, that's basically my constant sort of like pet topic or leitmotif, whether it's talking about incompetent men in leadership roles or the impact of AI on human behavior, and now authenticity. I think it's important that we understand what really goes on in our organizational context. And vis-a-vis authenticity, this is really understanding what's actually rewarded in a culture. And, to pretend or say that we reward people for just being who they are is the most inauthentic of narratives, of story, right? So there's a problem there. So, and if we don't like what the data shows us, and if we don't like the fact that impression management, social desirability, and making an effort to not be yourself in an unfiltered, uncensored way, if we don't like that, well, then you have an opportunity to change it. In fact, there are cultures of radical candor, and people may have seen Ray Dalio's talk, the Bridgewater culture, where he even says in a TED talk, I mean, well, we always say what we feel and think no matter what. Well, there are limits. Like if somebody has just had a baby and they show you a picture of the baby, we don't say your baby is ugly, but that's about it. These cultures are horrible places to work in.
Yeah.
They might appeal to some people, but for the majority of people, after 1 or 2 weeks, they want to quit. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum, a culture where everybody just pretends to be nice and lies and is just fake all the time and acts like a politician, that's also a very tedious place to work in. So I think it's about finding the balance and using data and evidence to put the needle where your company needs it.
So one of the big things that we haven't spoken about, Dr. Tomas, is AI and how that impacts authenticity in the AI age.
Yeah. Oh, this actually might be the most interesting question that I've been asked. So if we can go back to the beginning and there you go. No, well, super, super interesting. First, of course, in the early kind of stage or phase of AI, which is mostly, us being influenced by machine learning algorithms that curate and edit our lives, whether it's Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, etc., and also obviously how they nudge us to interact with each other on social media. There is a lot of research showing, that of course, as you would expect, people are less authentic in social media than in reality. There was this old kind of meme or cartoon that nobody is as funny as they seem in Facebook, as successful as they seem in LinkedIn, as, and that's largely true. But actually, because that now makes up a bigger part of our interactions with others at work than meeting somebody in the water cooler or in the coffee kind of machine or in the kitchen, actually, it's almost like it has conquered or invaded most of our professional self. And there are studies showing that actually, because people are showing off more or being a little bit more, well, they're behaving as the algorithms reward them, which also includes saying, oh, that was amazing, congratulations, when in fact we don't care very much about what the other person did. That's kind of spreading to analog encounters. But then there is what's happening now and what will happen shortly. I mean, as you know, it's already impossible to know whether we're interacting with a real version of you or a deep fake. That's doing two things. One, it's actually revaluing human-to-human connection in the analog world. In fact, in our field, in recruitment, for example, it's super interesting because AI, hiring AI is already a reality. And what it has done, because there's so much noise and distrust, is people are meeting each other in the cafeteria or around the corner in a restaurant to have an interview, which obviously isn't very good for diversity and isn't very scalable. The other one is that if you actually really want to be recognized as your real you, paradoxically, you can't just be yourself, because the natural version of you, AI will have copied. So you have to actually act in unnatural ways, because it's almost like a cat and mouse game or chase that you're playing with the algorithms. Same, even if you're starting to write an email and, the email autocomplete finishes this, that means that that's the very boring thing that you would have said. So I think AI is accidentally pushing us to be more creative and to create a newer or a better version of ourselves, something that can't be just diluted to deepfakes and, our kind of virtual avatars.
So we've got to keep AI on its toes.
Correct.
By pretending we are who we aren't, and we aren't who we are.
Exactly. And you have to think about the capacity to surprise others and act in an unpredictable way. Not by scaring them or doing something creepy, of course. This is a good kind of disclaimer. But in a way that makes them feel that you are human and makes you seem human.
Yeah. And there's too much of just generally sort of in sales and, like you said, recruitment and that sort of world, the reliance on the generic AI personalization has become so transparent that you can see right through it.
Yeah. Even when you get like a message, on LinkedIn or something, and it's like, sometimes you're like, are you human or not? Like, if you are, can you give me some signs?
Yeah. I showed my wife 2 adverts and she's like, those are both AI generated. I was like, I didn't actually. I was looking for a summer hat for our holiday, right?
Yeah.
So
it seems like she's right all the time.
I know. Geez, we need to not play this.
That's the conclusion of the podcast.
We need to not play this back to her. That's for sure. Listen, Dr. Tomas, the book Don't Be Yourself, I love it. It's really given me some food for thought. It's going to be on pre-order on Amazon on the 7th of October. Is that right?
Oh, no, it is already on pre-order. It launches on 7th of October, but if you want to make the algorithms happy and me happy, you can pre-order it now.
You can pre-order it now. And Dr. Tomas is actually one of a part of the team of the Work Intelligence Lab. So if you want to connect with him, he's on LinkedIn, very vocal, very popular, and I know a lot of people admire the work you do. So thank you for your time today, your interesting perspective around authenticity. I'm very excited to hear what you have to come up with next. And what I love, and what the link back to what we're doing at the lab, is how you are interpreting and challenging the data that we are sitting with today. So that really was a highlight for me.
It's all about the data. So there you go. Thank you, Karla. It's been great to chat.